Okay.
Hello, Soti, and welcome everyone. We are now beginning our online Dhamma group where we study Dhamma texts with Venerable Yuttadhammo, who is joining us from the Sri Mangalo Center in Sri Lanka. Today is actually quite an interesting day because it's actually Venerable Yuttadhammo's birthday, and he is joining us for the session today. So right now we are currently studying the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, specifically the commentary by the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw. Before we get back into our reading and continue our study, we will start our session off by taking the 5 precepts together. This is something that we do every session to establish a moral basis and foundation for us so that we can have a wholesome practice. Is there anyone that's willing to lead the precepts today for us?
I would like to.
Thank you, Sunda. Whenever you're ready, you may begin by requesting the refuges and precepts from Venerable Yuttadhammo. Thank you.
Aham Bante Tisaranena Saha Pancha Silani Yachami Dutiyampi Aham Bante Tisaranena Saha Pancha Silani Yachami Tatiyampi Aham Bante Tisaranena Saha Pancha Silani Yachami.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
E saranagamanang dititang.
Ama Bante.
Pāṇātiپātā vīramani sikkhapadaṃ samādhiyāmi.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Padinādāna vīramani sikkhapadaṃ samādhiyāmi.
Adinādāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Kāmesu micchācārā vīramani sikkhapadaṃ samādhiyāmi.
Kamesu miccācāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musāvādā vīramani sikkhapadaṃ samādhiyāmi.
Musāvādā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Surāmeraya majjapamadaṭṭhāna vīramani sikkhapadaṃ samādhiyāmi.
Sura meraya maja pamadatana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Imāni panca sikkhapadāni sīlena sugatiṃ yanti sīlena bhoga sampada sīlena nibbutiṃ yanti tasmā sīlaṃ visodhaye.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, we will now continue our reading and study of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta commentary. We are currently on the physical page of page 122, which is the page 132 of the PDF, specifically starting at the paragraph, in accordance with the teaching in the Mabhava Sutta. I have a reading order list in the Discord chat, and today we'll start off with Austin, as usual, reading 2 paragraphs each, and just remember to leave a gap or some space after each paragraph, just for time for discussion or questions, or Venerable Dhamma to share his insight. Austin, can you start us off today, please?
Yes. Are we also sharing the text? I don't see it here.
Yes, let's give Delaware a moment to pull that up.
Here you go.
Thank you, Delaware. Thank you, Austin. If you see it, you can begin when you're ready.
So we start from in accordance, right?
That's right.
Okay. In accordance with the teaching in the Dhamma Sutta, Dhamma is the field for the appearance of rebirth consciousness, Sandhi Vijnana, of the new becoming. Consciousness is the seed, and craving is the moisture. Meritorious or demeritorious karma serves as a field in which they may grow. Storing consciousness serves as the seed for the growth of the birth consciousness and craving, which delights in every sense object, in every existence, may be likened to the moisture that promotes its growth. Here, karma forming consciousness, abhisankara vijnana, that conditions new becoming is, according to the commentary, consciousness accompanying the volitional kamma, chetana. In the same way as it arises together with the first volitional kamma, so too it accompanies the later kamma activities, and as such, the consciousness that appears later should also be designated as karma forming consciousness. In particular, the disease through process consciousness takes which takes as its object karma, a sign of karma, or a sign of destiny, should be called the karma forming consciousness, because it is from this that birth consciousness, pati sandhi vijnana, arises. In addition, in the same way as a seed germinates only when it comes into contact with moisture, the seed of consciousness, receiving support and encouragement from craving, which accompanies or precedes it, in close proximity, tenaciously holds on to karma, a sign of karma, or a sign of destiny as its object, and gives rise to birth consciousness.
So he's bringing in Abhidhamma. He's trying to explain Abhidhamma, doing remarkably well to explain Abhidhamma in a fairly simple way, but it can be incredibly confusing if you have no familiarity with the Abhidhamma. But this is a pretty simple statement that he's making, even though it can be hard to understand. So first is he's pointing out this from the Pattamabhava Sutta, a very powerful teaching, that there's three things involved with rebirth, with being born again. Why does tanha lead to further becoming? Remember, just to recap, we are on the dukkha samudaya, the second truth. Second noble truth is that the origin of suffering is thirst, is desire, is craving. This is what leads to suffering. And one of the things the Buddha remarks about how it is the origin is that it's bono bhavika, which means it leads to further becoming. Without craving, without yearning, there would be no becoming. And as I mentioned, you can think of bhava in this life as well. Like if you want a car, you take out a loan. And taking out a loan is a significant becoming. It's something that wasn't there before. You've brought into existence this loan, this debt that you have. When you crave for a partner, you get married and you've taken on a whole new becoming, a marriage, a life. When you want children and you have children, then you've taken the child as a new bhava. This is a sort of a more simple way of understanding the idea of bhava. But the significant bhava is when you die. So at the moment of death, you create a new bhava, which means a whole new life for yourself because of that craving. And it comes about due to one of three things that we already talked about last week, and he mentions again here. It can either be you at the moment of death, you remember something you've done, something significant. Maybe you hurt someone or some living being. Maybe you helped someone. You were kind or generous, etc., etc. Something significant that the mind will cling on to, good or bad, and that will create the basis for your next life. The second is a symbol of karma. So it might not have been the act you performed, the kindness or the good or the evil deed that you performed, but it can be a symbol like a knife or a gift or something like that. And the third is gati nimitta. So you'll have a vision when you die. Once the body collapses, the mind becomes free and it starts to imagine a new life. And gati means the destination. So there'll be this whole narrative about your future life. You'll start to envision where you want to go. And clinging to that, it can lead to rebirth. And so here he just talks about at the last moment. So technically, you have to have a last moment and you have to have a first moment. The first moment is called the patisandhi vijnana. It's the relinking. So because of that consciousness, you've made a link, and there's a new life. So that's the first one in the new life. The last one is called Juti Citta. And Juti Citta, I mean, there's a whole process of several Cittas in a row, but basically at the last moment, there is this tanha, this craving and clinging. So that's all he's saying. Something simple. At the last moment of your life, with craving for one of these, or attachment to one of these three things, leads to future becoming. There's a typo there, if it was a bit confusing. It says, in particular, the deceased thought process. I don't know if you guys have that typo, but I have a typo.
Yes, I see it over on my end too, Bante. It says the
It'd be
process.
thought process consciousness.
What it represent the words storing consciousness?
I
So
couldn't understand that either. I don't know what that's referring to.
okay,
I thought it might be
just,
Juti Citta, but that doesn't make any sense.
no, that's just the end of.
Maybe he's referring to Bhavanga Citta. The translation might not be great, but
Yeah,
he may be
that
referring
could
to
be it.
Bhavanga.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, if it sounds, why is he going into this? What is he actually talking about? It's because you haven't studied Abhidhamma, so it's not familiar. Don't worry about it. For those of you who are a bit overwhelmed by this paragraph, it's pretty simple what he's saying. He's just trying to be very accurate from the Abhidhamma perspective.
Then, immediately after the dissolution of the disease thought process aggregates of mind and matter, the birth consciousness, holding on to the karma, sign of karma, or sign of destiny as its object, arises in a new existence complete with the physical base upon which it depends. With each consciousness, its mental concomitants also arise. The relinking consciousness, Patisandhi Vijnana, is followed by life continuum consciousness, Bhavanga, which goes on continuously throughout life as prescribed by one's own karmic energy. The arising of a new existence is brought about by two factors: one's own karma and craving. Without craving, however, karma by itself cannot bring about new becoming.
It's a powerful imagery that you can have a seed and you can have the soil, but without the water, everything being in place, this doesn't bear fruit. The water here is the craving. Likewise, a lot of experiences we might have, like pain, pleasure, or any kind of agreeable condition, like gaining a windfall of money, or meeting with good food, beautiful, pleasant music, and sights and sounds and smells and tastes. Without craving, there's no ignition, or in this case, there's no germination of the new bhava. Maybe you see a nice car that you want to get. Maybe you even buy the car. And if you have no craving for the car, it doesn't cause stress and suffering for you. Stress and suffering comes from the attachment and the need. So you'd only buy the car if there was some very great need. An arahant wouldn't buy a car. Is the thing. I mean, I suppose theoretically, before they became a monk. It's possible it could happen, but they wouldn't do so many things. They wouldn't do there's many things that they would never do because they require some form of yearning, some sort of desire for becoming. An arahant is more likely to just be content to pass away. They have no real desire for anything.
Okay, next paragraph. For an arahant, past meritorious deeds will come to fruition as good results before parinibbana. The multifarious gifts gained by Venerable Sivali and the perfect health enjoyed by Venerable Bakula are examples of the fruition of wholesome karma. Demeritorious deeds will, however, bear bad fruits, as for instance, lack of alms food for Venerable Losakatissa, or the fate by the Venerable Moggallana, who was bludgeoned to death by thugs. So he was beaten, basically. These karmas, however, do not have any more potential for causing fresh rebirth, as they are devoid of craving. Lacking the support and encouragement of craving at the time of the decease thought process, the karma-forming consciousness cannot arise, and hence there can be no rebirth. For this reason, only craving is attributed as the cause of fresh existence, Pono Bhavika. Therefore, craving forms the root cause of fresh becoming. For this reason too, the Blessed One pointed out craving as the cause of new existence. These are the words that the Blessed One used in the very first discourse to teach the existence of an afterlife. In spite of this clear teaching, there is a group of people who maintain that the Blessed One taught only about present existence and did not touch on future life. We cannot be certain whether these people are attempting to associate the Buddha's teaching with the annihilationist belief, Uchedavada, a very misguided effort, we must say. In reality, however, as long as craving endures, through failure to develop the Noble Eightfold Path, or even if developing it, not being fully advanced in accomplishment, so long this craving will continue to serve as the cause for fresh existence.
Yeah, so I've come across people like this. There are groups, there are even fairly famous teachers who seem to espouse this sort of view. I don't think mostly they are annihilationist in the sense that they believe at death there is nothing. I think generally what they would say is that they don't talk about death, what happens after death. I think it's more misguided in the sense that it limits the value of it limits your perception of the value of goodness and evil, of purity of mind, of clarity, of the Buddha's teaching in general, to something trivial like having a better life in the here and now. But I mean, at the core of it, it's a good. They come from a good place. The premise is good that you should focus on the present moment. We shouldn't be focused on future life. We shouldn't be focused on rebirth. We shouldn't be concerned about where am I going to go. Ultimately, the Buddha did teach to focus on the present moment. But a big reason for focusing on the present moment is the very fact that there is no end to samsara, and that we don't get away scot-free when we die. Like, you don't need to cultivate good qualities if you can put a limit on life and say, I'll just outrun the consequences. You see a lot of people, the majority of people in this world are fixated on acquiring more and more agreeable conditions at any cost. Sometimes at the cost of their, what other people would say, their very soul, their ethics, their morality. So people are not concerned with evil because they're going to outrun the consequences, and they really are in this life. They're going to outrun the consequences. Many people will die before they see any sort of, before they see any sort of consequence that they would acknowledge to be a bad consequence of their addiction. And so without these sorts of teachings on rebirth and future lives, it's very difficult to appreciate the need to do something more for many people, for people who have a good life, who have comfort, who have pleasure, people who are privileged. You see how that privilege leads people to be such horrible, corrupt individuals, stealing and manipulating and lying and even hurting and torturing other living beings for their own pleasure, because they'll just outrun the consequences. There's no need to be a good person. Now, qualify that by the fact that deep down, indeed, if they were ever to practice mindfulness, they would realize how inferior their happiness was to a state of mind that it was pure and clear and independent, right? Because you're so stressed out about getting the things that you desire, worried about losing them, racked by guilt for your evil deeds, busy suppressing that guilt, rationalizing, constantly running. You have to run away and run towards all the time. They don't realize how much, but they'll never realize that. You'll never appreciate that unless it can be put in perspective. I mean, for some people, they'll never realize it, but many people, this discussion about death and the fact that we're really not ready for death, we're not ready for what comes next. We don't have any sense of understanding of the nature of death. And for many people, it is possible that that becomes at least a potential cause for concern. As a theory, it puts limits on the importance of the practice of good qualities. Of course, people who are very much dedicated to sensual pleasure in the worldly sphere mostly don't believe that when you die, anything comes after. If they did, it would be something quite unpleasant to consider, that you do have to eventually deal with the results of your addictions.
When the Noble Eightfold Path has been fully accomplished and arhatship is attained, craving will be completely eradicated and there will be no more rebirth. Thus, when exercising retrospection on the attainment of enlightenment as a Buddha or an Arahant, the thought always occurs to the Noble Ones: this is my last existence. There will be no more rebirth. ayamantima jati natidani punnabhavati. This reflection is also included in the later section of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Such reflections make it obvious that unless craving is completely rooted out, continuous, fresh existences are inevitable.
An arahant knows for them there's no further becoming. For everyone else, there obviously is.
How this craving brings repeated rebirths will now be illustrated by a few stories. There are thousands of stories illustrating this fact, but it will suffice to take 3 stories from the commentaries and 4 or 5 from the modern period.
Brahma finds delight in a peak's pen. At one time, the Blessed One went into Rajagaha for alms. On seeing a young sow, the Blessed One smiled. Noticing the white radiations that shone forth from the teeth of the Buddha, the Venerable Ananda knew that the Buddha was smiling. Accordingly, he asked, "Venerable Sir, why did you smile?"
So a sow is a female pig. This is according to the commentaries that the Buddha had a radiance about him. Seems hard to believe. It might not be true, but it's not really important. I just want to mention this because don't get hung up on it. If you don't believe it, no problem. It's not pertinent to the Dhamma or the teachings at all. But it is the things that the commentary explains about the Buddha, that when he smiled, for example, you could actually see a radiance. His teeth were so beautiful.
The Blessed One pointed out the young soul to Venerable Ananda and said, "See that young soul? She was a young woman during the dispensation of Kakusantha Buddha. When she died, she was reborn as a hen in the neighborhood of monastic feeding hall. The small hen fell victim to an eagle. However, earlier she happened to have heard the recitation by a meditating monk of a meditation subject, which aroused in her wholesome thoughts. By virtue of these merits, the small hen was reborn as a princess named Ubari in a royal family. The Princess Ubari later left the household life and became a wandering mendicant. Residing in the mendicant's residence, she happened one day to gaze at the maggots in the latrine. The worms served as an object for meditation on the contemplation of foulness of a worm-infested corpse, by which he attained the first jhana. When she passed away, she was reborn in the Brahma worlds. On expiry from the Brahma world, she became the daughter of a millionaire in the human world, which she left again only to be reborn as a beak in this existence. I saw all of these events, which made me smile.
Hearing this story of repeated births in various existences, Venerable Ananda and the other monks became greatly agitated with religious emotion. The Blessed One stopped walking, and while still standing on the roadside, taught the Dhamma in 6 verses, the first one of which stated, Yatapi mul anupadave dale, kinopi ruko punareva ruati, evampi tananusaye anuhate, nivatati dukamidam puna punam. If the main roots of a tree remains undamaged and in the good condition, even when the upper branches are cut off, that tree will grow again, developing new buds and shoots. Likewise, if defilements remain lying dormant, they are not yet eradicated. This suffering of rebirth will arise time and again repeatedly. What is conveyed by the verse is that during her existence as Princess Yubari, she renounced the world to become a wanderer. By practicing meditation, she attained the first jhana, which could dispel by abandoning Vikambana Pahana, only the arisen defilements, Pariyutana Kilesa, that is the craving for sex. By means of dispelling, by abandoning, jhana can eradicate defilements only to a certain extent and for a certain period. Thus, she was able to dispel the craving for sensual pleasures when she attained the first jhana, and later in the Brahma world. However, when she was born again in the human realm as the daughter of a millionaire, the craving for sensual pleasures reappeared because it had not been rooted out by the noble path. The craving for existence, of course, persisted even when she had attained jhana. Thus, because the latent defilements had not been completely uprooted, she had to descend from the Brahma world through the human world into a pig's existence. So long as the craving persists, repeated rebirths will take place in this way in various existences.
So he mentions Pariyutthana Kilesa. What he's saying is that he wasn't able to, I don't think he mentions it right, she was not able to dispel Anusaya Kilesa. So there's basically two kinds of Kilesa. There's those that have arisen and those that have not arisen. And what that means is that you can't say a person is pure just because they don't have kilesas, because at any given moment, the mind might not have any kilesa. But the point is there is the potential. The potential is because the ignorance and the wrong views, the lack of right view, which allow for and actually require the arising of liking, disliking, of greed, anger, delusion. It means they will arise again as long as there's the potential. That's why we distinguish between arisen and latent. Latent means potential. Most people just have the potential for defilements. They don't have defilements all the time. In fact, many moments are going to be pure moments, good moment, wholesome moment. But for anyone but an arahant, there's always the anusaya, the potential. And that becomes clear when someone practices samatha meditation. Their minds can be so pure, completely pure, for long periods of time. And when they die, they can be reborn in a pure place for thousands or millions of years. The potential is still there. The only way that potential is eradicated is through enlightenment. Perfect clarity of mind. He mentions latent defilements, yeah.
Mila, are you able to read next?
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
In reference to the story of descent from the Brahma world to a pig's existence, the Sayadaws of ancient times have left an aphorism. In the Brahma world, she shines bright. In pig's pen, too, she finds delight. However, it is not possible to be reborn as a pig directly from the Brahma world, nor as any other animal, nor in the lower realms. By virtue of the access concentration, upachara samadhi, previously attained, rebirth can take place only as a human being or in a celestial abode. The young sow of the above story also passed through human life, where she was born as the daughter of a millionaire. It is quite possible that she landed in a pig's existence after being the daughter of a millionaire because of the bad karma she had committed at that time by being haughty and insolent to those to whom she should have shown respect. When the young sow died, she was reborn in a royal family, Rajakula, of Suvarnabhumi, which is generally taken to be the country of Phaeton. Some scholars, however, take Suvarnabhumi to be the island of Sumatra, relying on the bronze inscriptions made by King Devapala about 1500 Buddhist era.
From being a princess of Suvarnabhumi, she passed over to Varanasi, India as a woman. She then became a woman in Varanasi, southeast of Bombay. From there, she was reborn the daughter of a horse merchant, Asawanija. in the seaport of Suparaka, northwest of Bombay. Next, she became the daughter of a ship owner, Navika, at the port of Kawira in the southeasternmost part of the Indian peninsula. This is the coastal district inhabited by the Tamil people, formerly called Damila. After that life, she was reborn in the family of the government official Isarakula at the Anuradhapura of present-day Sri Lanka. Her next life was as a daughter of a man of property, Kutumbika, named Sumana from Bokanta, a village south of Anuradhapura. She took the name Sumana after her father. Later, her father left that village and settled down in the Mahamuni village of the Digavapi district. One day, a minister of King Dutagamini named Lakundaka Atimbara happened to visit the Mahamuni village on some business. Upon seeing the young lady Sumana, he fell madly in love with her. He married her with great pomp and ceremony and carried her off to his village of Mahapuna. The Venerable Maha Anuruddha, who resided at the Mahavihara, happened to visit her village for alms. While waiting for alms food at the gate of her house, he saw Sumana and said to his companion monks, how wonderful, how marvelous! The young soul of the Blessed One's time is now the wife of the minister Lakundaka Atimbara.
Bante, I'm a bit confused about the timeline now. Is it the young soul of the Blessed One from a different era, or is it the Gautama Buddha?
Gautama Buddha. This is all the history of Sri Lanka. This is probably from the Dipavamsa, which has a lot of stories in it that I'm not sure are entirely are not entirely embellished, at the very least. It's hard to pin down what actually happened. They have this record of many fantastical things happening. It's quite a story. I mean, there's no reason to doubt it, I suppose, except we have no evidence, so we can only take someone else's word for it. This sort of thing, of course, would happen. It's a bit surprising that a monk should be able to recognize her. But magical powers are something else. People who have these supernatural powers can be quite remarkable sometimes. Who knows? This is, of course, lifetime after lifetime, and eventually in Sri Lanka. All these places now are in Sri Lanka, which means this most likely came from the Dipavamsa, this story. So Anuradhapura is I think it was the capital at one point, but it's the place where the Bodhi tree is in Sri Lanka. Digavapi is apparently the place where the Buddha came. The people here believe the Buddha came. In Thailand, the people in Thailand believe the Buddha came to Thailand as well. Of course, the Burmese people believe he came to Burma. And I mean, we don't have any reason to doubt it, except there's no record outside of those countries. But it is pretty convenient that each country says he went to their countries. Did he? Certainly possible. But it's easy to be skeptical, to think it's much more likely that Buddhists come up with these stories. I don't know. It's an interesting question, but not really of great importance. But it is a thing where they believe the Buddha came. So Digawapi was the place where the Buddha is said to have come and meditated in Sri Lanka. It's just a name that has meaning for Sri Lankan Buddhists. Duttagamini was an ancient Sri Lankan king. I don't really know his story. On hearing this exclamation, Sumana, the wife of the minister, developed knowledge of her previous existences, Satisaranyana, and recalled the previous existences she had passed through. In consequence, she became agitated with fear at the prospect of repeated births in the cycle of existences. Asking permission from her husband, she went to a bhikkhuni monastery and got ordained. After ordination, she listened to a discourse on the Satipatthana Sutta at Tisamahawihara. Practicing mindfulness meditation in accordance with the sutta, she became a stream winner, well established in the first stage of the path and its fruition. Then, when King Duttagamini came on the throne, he went back to her native village, Okada, where at the Kalla Mahavihara monastery, he heard the discourse on the Asivisopama Sutta and became an arahant, free from all corruptions. Reflecting on the 13 existences of Sumana thoughtfully and mindfully, one could get aroused with religious emotion. When the young woman, at the time of the Kakusanda Buddha, died, she left behind her family, possessions, and her own physical body. The bereft family and friends would have grieved over her death. She became a hen. What a frightful thought that a human being could be reborn a hen. That hen would have had a family and friends too. She met with a terrible death from decapitation when an eagle seized her and struck her fiercely with its beak. There is this consolation, however, that she was reborn as a princess for the merit accrued from having heard a discourse on meditation. The hen would not, of course, know anything of the Dhamma, but as she had given devout attention to the discourse, certain merit would have accrued to her, for which she was reborn a princess. Listening to a Dhamma discourse is thus very beneficial and fruitful. Yeah, these sorts of stories are, of course, interesting to people. I mean, this is the kind of thing, stories are good at capturing people's attention. But it has a deeper effect on us to consider these sorts of stories. This isn't the sort of story that anyone outside of Buddhist countries would often hear. Remember, his audience is incredibly accepting of this sort of story. They wouldn't question it or doubt it, not even to the extent that I am. At least pointing out that obviously there is some cause for doubt, and it's to acknowledge the fact that non-Buddhists are most likely going to doubt a lot about many of the aspects of this story. But I think it's especially valuable for us to hear these sorts of things. Those of us who grew up in places where we were taught very different things about the nature of samsara, either that when you die there's nothing, or quite commonly when you die something very specific happens to you based on whether you believe our religion or not. And so to hear this sort of narrative has the effect of making us consider a new way of looking at, or a new possibility for how samsara functions, which happens to be the way samsara actually functions, right? And so it helps conceptually for us to resonate with very important truths about reality, about the nature of karma, the nature of defilement, the nature of good and evil, the nature of what we're actually experiencing in reality. Because a view that says if you're Christian or if you belong to this religious group, you go to heaven. If you don't belong to it, you go to hell. I mean, it's so far removed from actual reality that it creates this dissonance or this insulation from reality. You can't possibly believe that and have any connection with the way things actually work. But when you start to hear these sorts of stories, because they are conceptual descriptions of ultimate reality, right? When we talk about how a person develops, or how a hen listens to a monk and as a result is born, what, in heaven, as a princess. We start to appreciate the connection between the quality of our life and the quality of our minds and our rebirth. Not, I mean, these are great things to listen to because of how inspiring they are. They create this emotion, remind us, oh yes, it's a big deal when you die. This could happen to me. When you have to consider, what if I were reborn as a hen and got killed by an eagle? And so it's a rare sort of story to hear this, 13 different lifetimes, one after another. Regardless of whether this actually happened, I mean, we have really no reason to doubt any of the story, except that it's hard to understand how anyone could know this. So maybe some of it was just conjecture, but it could also be that a monk had some very strange power of being able to recognize past lives of another being. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. Even if it's just a story, it resonates because it's in line with the truth. I mean, it's special in that way. I think of stories that have morals, like Aesop's fable, for example, are often not only not moral, but also not very in line with the way things actually happen. So the Buddhist stories, like the Jatakas or any of these stories, are special. They stand out from other stories due to their relationship with the way things actually happen, their relationship with karma and good and evil, and the purity of the mind and so on.
Bante, maybe I'm just repeating what you say, but they're really, as practicing Buddhist, or even as a practicing Buddhist, I really don't see a reason to, or anything detrimental that could come from believing those stories. It's quite the opposite, because we always have the theory that's very important about the what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, but it's also important to see what's beneath that and even have those kinds of fantastical stories, because it gives the teachings more life, I would say. And even as someone who's not in that country or culture, it's, I think, very I appreciate it to hear these stories, and I think we should be open to it.
Yeah, I certainly, what I want to be clear is I certainly don't want to encourage skepticism, but rather to acknowledge it, that quite often people are skeptical, and it's not really the point. So it's going to be unbeneficial to be skeptical, and you don't need to be skeptical. But no, you don't have to. I don't think there's real benefit in believing the stories, because that would imply that you ignore the fact that you have no reason to believe something. I mean, as you have no evidence. And so it's not the best way to say, I believe this story, or I try to make myself believe it. What you should say is, this is what I've heard. And the lesson from it is this. That's enough. You don't have to believe these stories. what you can say is that they came from a fairly reliable source, which is Buddhists, right? Buddhists don't lie. That's not usually a thing, or it's less likely anyway. But I think it's best to not focus on whether something actually happened, and to focus more on the qualities, more on the association with reality. Of course, in these stories, there is a benefit to things actually having happened. The part with the Buddha we know has a very reliable source, because it actually comes from the canonical texts, where the Buddha met this young pig and did smile. Well, the core texts we have relate this occurrence, which is we still can't be sure, but it's pretty reliable.
But Bhante,
And the value is that then we can say to ourselves, this most likely is the way things happen, as opposed to someone just imagining, I think it happens like this, and so on. Because you could tell a story. Someone could say, a Buddhist could write a story from their imagination, thinking that this is the way karma happens. And who knows, it might actually have problems. It might not be exactly the way things happen. He's going to go on to some more modern stories, which are interesting because they're related by people fairly reliably. Like someone told the Sayadaw that they met someone like this, or someone even, the Sayadaw met certain people who described their past lives. So unless they are lying, which is unreasonable to think, it's interesting to hear them talk about past life memories and so on.
I mean, Bhante, I'm not sure if you disagree with what I'm saying now, is that I thought even, I mean, I don't know if I want to say belief, but even listening to the story that the Buddha's smile was radiating kind of helps if you want to believe it, to just appreciate the Buddha. Or do you think it's still a bit too much if you believe that?
Sure. Again, I just want to be open to the fact that there's not really a good reason to believe that that happened. I mean, the bigger belief is that the Buddha had some kind of rays radiating from his body wherever he went, which one monk pointed out is probably not true, at least not for everyone. It may be that spiritual people could see this aura of the Buddha. Maybe there is such a thing as auras around certain people. I actually met a monk who was able to see auras. He described my aura and other people's auras, and he was able to tell people's defilements based on their auras. It was interesting. But he had a lot of strange things, strange experiences. But he seemed like a very dedicated Buddhist monk. Didn't seem like he was crazy anyway. So it may be that. But there's cause to believe that people couldn't pick the Buddha out of a crowd. We have stories of a king who had to ask someone which one is the Buddha. And if you had to ask, it's pretty clear that the Buddha wasn't radiating colors out of his body. Not that everyone could see. It would make sense if some people could see it, like people who are spiritually developed and had the ability to see such things, which is probably pretty rare, even in the time of the Buddha. That's the only reason I brought that up, because I don't think there's reason to believe that the Buddha radiated special light that everyone could see. Maybe Ananda could see something like that.
It's like for a rather irrelevant comment, it's sort of like in Indiana Jones, you have to be pure of heart to see the Holy Grail, pick it out of the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, it seems trivial and inconsequential. I only pointed it out because obviously there's going to be some problem for some people thinking, what have I gotten myself into, where they're talking about people's teeth radiating light? Like, that's not what I signed up for. So I just wanted to point out it's not really relevant. And yes, it may not have actually happened, and that's okay. And it would be better if that is true, that it didn't actually happen, and it would be better if it wasn't included, obviously, but it may be true. And if it's not, then we acknowledge this as a potential shortcoming of the texts, that they're not perfect, and we just move on.
No, it seems to me it's duly pointed out. I appreciate the pointing out, but the spirit of the text is very insightful, and the details are details surrounding the insight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's mostly the details that are questionable.
Thank you, Bante. I think I understand.
I think to your point about it inspiring people is dangerous, because there are texts that add, not mostly not Theravada texts, but there are texts in other Buddhist traditions that obviously have added so much flowery language that just most likely didn't happen, and it's just incredible embellishment. And the result is often a fixation on form, a fixation on some presentation, and on clinging to these wonders. That I mean, we even have it in Theravada, and I'm not sure that. I mean, I think it's dangerous if it's made up, because it leads to a fixation on things that don't really have any connection with reality.
Yes, Bante.
Like, inspiration is all and good, but when you become focused on faith,
Mhm.
a faith-based group where you're inspired and you need to be inspired, I don't think it's really the best way to go about things. You should be inspired by the fact that we're going to die. You should be inspired by the uncertainty of life. You should be inspired by the benefits of good deeds, the benefits of meditation. People often ask, it's a question we often get, I don't feel inspired by the Dhamma. I don't feel inspired. Is there anything you can do to inspire me, or anything I can do to become inspired enough to want to practice meditation? This is the thing. And I've answered before, I don't think inspiration is the best cure for that. It's kind of ignoring the cause, and inspiration is kind of just a band-aid, kind of like something you could cling to, right? If you were inspired, then you would cling to it. What you should be able to see is the lack of inspiration is something in and of itself. It's usually an aversion towards the idea of practicing, a laziness. It can be clinging to pleasure, clinging to sensuality, and all of that can be a good object of mindfulness. And the best way to overcome such lack of inspiration is to focus on what's actually there. Focus on that lack of inspiration,
Yes, I
rather
agree.
than trying to make yourself inspired.
I agree, Bante. That's probably like one of those crutches you don't want to get attached to, or not that there's anything you can get or should get attached to. But I see your point. Thank you for explaining.
Like the Buddha himself said, and he acknowledged that he had very incredible powers and he was able to do incredible things. But he said that incredibility, whatever the word is, that incredibleness is trivial and compared to the incredibleness of being able to teach. And that when the Buddha taught people, they actually became enlightened, and that's incredible. But these magical things and all that incredible stuff is not very incredible. I think in regards to that king, there's this idea that king, the story that the king had to ask someone, which one is the Buddha? There's also a story that the Buddha's cousin was mistaken for the Buddha, said they looked alike. Is that anyone with any clarity of mind would probably be able to very easily tell the difference, that the Buddha was special, even his physical form. I think I have no doubt. I mean, certainly it's possible it's not true, but I'm of the belief that absolutely the Buddha had an incredible presence, and anyone with any ability to see that would be instantly transfixed and transfixed and overwhelmed by the incredible nature of the Buddha's physical form and presentation and presence. And that the king just wasn't able to see that because he was not a very spiritually advanced person. So I think it's a middle ground where probably the Buddha didn't have any like colored rays as a signpost, like, oh, is this actually a human being? But pretty easy to see his radiance. And people who are spiritually inclined probably actually saw radiance. So not everyone sees things the same. Yeah, there is a story about how the Buddha's body emitted light when he contemplated the Abhidhamma. And so that's entirely possible. It is also entirely possible that whenever a Buddha smiles, light comes from his teeth. Certainly possible. I don't have any frame of reference to doubt or to refute it. I just wanted to point out that it's okay if you don't believe it. Don't get hung up on that detail.
So, Delua, I believe the reading is done for the day. Or
Yes, I think we can stop.
Okay, so now we will transition into a discussion time or period where if you have anything you want to talk about the text or ask, you are free to do so. In the meantime, we'll be preparing for our Q&A portion.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to discuss something or ask something about the text, I'll leave some space before starting the YouTube questions and Discord questions which people wrote down. But you are also allowed to interrupt in between if you want to ask or something about a question or if it's on topic. Okay, I will go ahead with the first question, Bante. What does karmic energy mean? After physical death, does the mind still create thoughts such as craving, etc.?
Karmic energy. It's just a way of describing what we observe. We observe that karma is always succeeded by, always followed by result. Karma is something that has result, and so we describe that as an energy. The energy, I mean, energy, what do we learn in science? Energy is the ability to perform work. So karma is something that when it happens, something is produced as a result of that, something that wouldn't have happened without that karma. That's all the energy is. It's not like it's a thing that actually exists. It's just the capacity of karma to perform a function. And that function is very simple, to bring about a specific, not just a result, because other things bring about results, but it brings about important results. In other words, karma brings about pleasure or pain, happiness or suffering. After physical death, yes, after physical death is not, it seems, I'm not so clear on this, but physical death is not the only, no, is not the absolute end of life. It's there's texts that say it, the mind is, when it's not supported by the body, the mind is carried on by the craving. It's supported by the craving. Tanha, after the body stops being a support, there can be craving. And so this is, I think, where you get these stories of beings or people after they died who then visit their relatives before they die. There's apparently this date, the Tibetans talk about 49 days. Many of you have probably heard this, 49 days, and then beings move on. But it's not just in Tibetan tradition. In Thailand, they have this idea as well. I think here in Sri Lanka as well. They actually have a 50-day ceremony where they offer gifts to monks and listen to the Dhamma and chant the Abhidhamma and this sort of thing. Because they believe that it's possible that the being is still there. Of course, it's possible for a being to be around for much longer if they're reborn as a ghost. But I think for many beings, it seems like, based on what people have talked about and experienced with people who passed away, that it's quite common for there to be a short period of being something like a ghost. This isn't really orthodox Theravada. It's people will read the texts, and the common belief is that you die, you're reborn as a ghost, and then you have a whole life as a ghost and that sort of thing. But there appears to be this sort of intermediate period that isn't really talked about. And so the Tibetans talk about, they have this whole idea of what it's called and so on. But there is basis for, in the text, let alone the basis in reality. But even in the text, it does talk about how the mind is carried on by craving before it's reborn. That period seems to apparently last, for many beings, 50 days. Somehow 50 days is a common limit, where after 50 days they move on.
And then just to clarify, it's functional karma can have no results, possibly, right?
There's no such thing as functional karma. There's
Okay.
functional minds which replace karma in an arahant.
So where I was coming from is earlier in the text it was written that only karma without craving is not sufficient for rebirth. So that karma is what is being referred to.
Maybe you can call that functional karma. I've never really heard of that. We don't really call it karma. Maybe we do. No, I don't think we do. Anyway, karma is not the most accurate way of describing it. What we'll normally say is akusala and kusala. So there's kusala citta, there's akusala citta, and then there's something called kriya citta or kriya citta, which is functional. We translate as functional. But it simply means simply done. And I guess the root is which is where you get the word kamma and karma from. So you could call it a karma citta. You could actually just call it a working mind, an action mind, meaning that it's just action. So maybe functional kamma is a good way to describe it. I mean, they're just words. But we wouldn't call it kamma usually, because kamma, we usually use that word to describe ethical acts which are either wholesome or unwholesome, meaning they're associated with a wholesome mind or an unwholesome mind. Technically, arahants don't have wholesome minds. They're identical to wholesome minds, but they're not called wholesome minds because there is no there's no craving. There's no desire for results.
Yes, that's very clear, Bante. I was thrown off myself a little bit when I read that earlier in the text about karma and not having any rebirth without craving, karma without craving, and so I just kind of came up with that a little bit of
Well,
functional.
yeah, I mean, when he's using kamma here, sorry, the other way of talking about kamma is as the actual physical act. So arahants do always good deeds. They're always giving and kind and teaching and ethical and they're every act, every move they make is pure. So all of their actions look very much like good karma, but they're different technically because they can't give rise to rebirth. I don't know. It may even be just a very technical difference, and it's just because they don't lead to rebirth. But the truth is, they are very much karmic, and they do very much have results. I guess the point is they don't have results in the mind. They don't serve to affect the arahant's mind. Is the point. But practically speaking, when an arahant gives gifts, it does lead to good results in this life. It's just they can't be reborn because of those deeds. And importantly, they can't give results in next life, because usually we talk about kamma as giving results in this life and results in future lives. For an arahant, that can't happen. But when an arahant gives gifts and is kind to people and teaches, they can become famous, they can become well-loved, and many good things happen to them. So it looks very much like Dhamma end result. They've done good deeds and good things have happened to them. It's just the way it works in the mind is different because the arahant is already perfectly free and independent and unattached to results in any way.
That's clear, Bante. Just one final, since I was on this topic, is it possible that the good karma, for example, how we are in the way that we are talking about it, that an arahant performs, uh, maybe, of course, it doesn't have any bearing on future or anything, but would it be possible to undo some of the maybe past karma that may not then have the opportunity to bear fruit, like how the examples were given of arahants being bludgeoned or whatever? Maybe that's being undone, or maybe that's not the case.
No, I think it is a little bit different. Like for an arahant, they won't do kamma, they won't do good deeds the same way as unenlightened beings. They often do more incredible good deeds because they're able to give up everything. They could just give, but there's not a sense of, may this lead to something. They're not excited about it. They're not overjoyed by it. An arahant is kind of indifferent. There's certainly, it's a very different act. So it's unlikely that they will do the same sorts of things as not unenlightened people would do that would protect them against these things. For example, protections. Buddhists will often do good deeds for the explicit purpose of protecting them against bad deeds, against bad results. They're afraid of them, and they think in Buddhist cultures, there's often this this practice of giving gifts and dedicating them to any being that might have a grudge against you. Wera. Wera is this big thing in Thailand and I guess all Buddhist societies. Wera is the idea that even from past lives, people might hold grudges and they might not even realize it, but they still do bad things in this life to you, hurt you because of you hurting them in past lives. Maybe you get hit by a car, and the driver was someone you hurt in a past life, or maybe they just get very angry at you and they don't know why, but it's because of something you did to them in a past life, that sort of thing. So people are afraid of this. Buddhists are afraid of this and do good deeds to try and avoid that. An arahant doesn't do that, isn't interested in that. So it's much less likely that they're going to do those things that protect them. I mean, though honestly, they're going to be so protected for other reasons. They're protected by how revered and respected they are, and how protected they are with the people who protect them, and beings that protect them. Like beings even protected the Buddha, right? There were devas who protected him, and arahants often had this sort of protection from devas even. But it's a little bit different. It's not the same as people doing deeds to protect themselves. So as a result, you'll often find, I think you'll more often find. That's one of the reasons you will find arahants suffering, because they're not concerned. They're not even really concerned with their health, but they're not concerned with what food they eat, not to any great extent. But another thing that causes arahants, on the topic of what you said, to experience suffering is the fact that apparently many bad deeds that would only come to fruition in future lives have to come to fruition in this life, and it can actually accelerate the result. This apparently is a thing. I mean, this is something that I learned about early on. I was told that through the practice of meditation, bad things can happen to you because you're purifying the mind so radically that all future stuff, it's like opening a door to future resultants and giving them a clearer path to come to fruition. So if you've done lots of good deeds in the past and you're waiting for those results, you don't have to wait so long. Good things, incredibly good things, can just miraculously happen. Some people relate this. And on the other hand, accidents can happen. People will suddenly have a terrible accident happen to them after they've practiced meditation. So not to be afraid of these sorts of things. It's something that would have come eventually. But to be aware that sometimes strange things can happen after you meditate. It's actually pretty uncommon, but from time to time you hear these strange coincidences after someone does intensive meditation practice.
Thank you, Bhante.
They
That's
talk
very
about for an arahant, this often is a big deal, like a Moggallana. Angulimala is a prime example. The Buddha said if he hadn't have become an arahant, he would have suffered in hell. But instead, he had to experience this great torture in this life. He was beaten rather severely and had his fingers in his hands, the bones in his hands all broken and that sort of thing.
Okay, moving to the next question, Bhante. I would like to meditate more regularly. I'm following the precepts, but I have a few worries about little edge cases. This stops me from practicing. So my question is, should I just start and improve with time, or what should I do?
Worries about edge cases. It stops you from practicing. I think you've got that's your real problem. How is it that your worry stops you from practicing? Sounds like you have some kind of view that says, if I can't be sure that my precepts are pure, I shouldn't start meditating, which is not a good view. Not a good view at all. So before we start practicing, we take the precept. And means we take them verbally. Or you don't have to do it out loud. You can also do it in your mind. That's fine. And breaking the precepts is going to interfere with your practice, absolutely. Makes it impossible to progress, breaking them. But they kind of go out, they kind of work off of each other. Like if you're not mindful, it's much more difficult to keep the precepts in the first place. So before practicing, we take the precept. It doesn't mean before keeping them, before being sure that we're keeping them, we don't practice. That would be very wrong. That would be very wrong to do. Make a determination to keep them. You practice, and when you break the precepts, you practice again. You determine to keep the precepts again, and you practice again. And it's really through actual mindfulness that you really are perfectly able to keep the precept. Only a Sotapanna is sure of keeping the 5 precepts. Someone who has seen Nibbana, someone who has quite intensively practiced meditation. So a beginner meditator is not going to be able to be assured of keeping the precepts 100%. It's certainly possible that they might break the precept, but they should never take that as a sign to stop meditating. And if anything, they should see that as a more urgent, giving more urgency to practicing meditation. What you should be noting here is your worry. You're worried about little edge cases. This precept should never be a cause for worry. Oh, I broke the precept. What's going to happen to me? Worry is not helpful. It doesn't make it easier to keep the precepts when you're worried about them. Worry is unwholesome, delusion-based. You should absolutely note the worry. You just have to appreciate that breaking the precepts makes it impossible to progress in the practice. And so you keep practicing, and when you break the precepts, you determine to keep them again. Take it as take it from a scientific perspective. Don't put so much emotion or investment in it, because when you worry about them, there's a self involved, right? Oh no, what's going to happen to me? There's clinging involved there. You should instead say, this isn't going to work if I keep doing this. And so you work out how to change that. You find ways to change to get the result that's expected or the result that's desired. That's all. Don't get so obsessive about the precept or about anything, really.
The next question is a bit longer, and the person asks Bhante, I had people at work who really enjoyed torturing and manipulating me and others. It was simply fun for them, like you said, quite literally. These people have addictions and tendencies that cause anger to arise on me in waves. I know that I have a way for payback and enough evidence for revenge, but I'm trying to turn toward metta and other Brahma Viharas. Instead of reacting to that impulse, when I engage in focused practice, I don't appreciate these memories coming back. Will this anger influence my rebirth regardless of whether I act on it or not? How do I destroy the arising of it?
One of the scariest things about rebirth is it's highly unpredictable and volatile. I mean, a spiritually advanced individual will be much better at determining their rebirth. In fact, people with great sila are said to be able to determine their rebirth. They're able, if they choose, make a determination to be born here or there, have it come true. It's much more reliable for someone who is of pure mind. But for someone who acknowledges that from time to time they get angry, it's like a lottery. That's one of the balls in those ball machines for the lottery. It's the one that might come out. You don't know which one's going to come out. I mean, it's not really a lottery, but for those of us who don't have this depth of the Buddha's wisdom, it seems very much like that. And for all intents and purposes, it is just a lottery, meaning it's a chance. You can't say for sure that anger is going to influence your rebirth, but it's certainly a good possibility. It can be greed, it can be anger, it can be delusion. It could be that at the moment of death, you've practiced mindfulness enough, so at that moment, you're able to apply mindfulness and you die with a pure mind and go to heaven. Doesn't mean the anger disappeared. It still has the potential to arise in the future, even though you got lucky, sort of. You had a good mind state. So cultivating the habit of mindfulness puts more of those lottery balls in the mix. And so with enough of that practice, it's much more likely that when you die, good things are going to come. But it kind of makes you realize that you shouldn't be too fixated on rebirth, because you can't do a lot to control. I mean, you can't perfectly control your rebirth. It's not really what you should be focused on. Rebirth is not the end of everything anyway. If you're not an arahant, you're going to be reborn. It's much better to focus on the quality both in this life and the next life. Don't give up anger because you're afraid it's going to lead to rebirth in hell. Pretty good reason. But it's not really the best reason, and it's not the best thing to focus on. On a deeper level, you should give up anger because of the quality it brings. It reduces the quality of life in this life and the next. A couple of points. Just to be clear with yourself that it's not other people that cause anger to arise. It's your dislike. It's your delusion, your idea that comes from life after life of feeding it, that anger is the right response. I mean, how many people in the world would be quite upset to hear that it's not the right response? If you said, these people did these terrible things, don't get angry about it. They would get angry about that. They would be, how dare you say I shouldn't get angry about these awful, horrible things these people have done, right? That's a common thing. It's not, I doubt anyone could claim to not having heard this or experienced this as a part of the pressure that's exerted by our parents, our society, our friends about how we should behave. You should get angry. We're taught people will get upset when you say you shouldn't get angry. So this is the reason why you get angry, is because this is ingrained in us from so many sources and by our own justifying, the self-justification, self-righteousness. I don't deserve that. I should get angry. It's right to be angry. I'm right to be angry about this. So that's why we get angry. It really has nothing intrinsically to do with the behavior of others. It's our at its base arbitrary response. Meaning, like, there's no reason to get angry about the most horrible evil. Even someone did the most unspeakable things to you. There's still absolutely zero reason to get angry. There's nothing intrinsic about that says, yes, this you should be angry about. So be clear about that, because it's unequivocally true. It's absolutely essential doctrine to understand and appreciate that there's nothing about whatever anyone does to you that says it's right to be angry about this, ever. You just have that we have that misunderstanding. Yes, get angry about this. Bad habit. That's reinforced by wrong views. So, what that does is it helps you focus inwardly and pay less attention to the things other people do, because it's just samsara. There's no meaning. It's like a rock falls on your head or someone throws a rock at you. It actually doesn't have any difference. Would you get angry if a rock fell on your head? Yell at the rock. If the answer is no, then don't yell at the person who throws the rock at you, because it's both samsara. I could mention that it's not always wrong to expose the evil that others have done. Doesn't mean you have to avoid any kind of action that might cause consequences for those people. You have to be very careful, though, because it's very hard to not want bad consequences for bad people and to not rejoice and seek those out. And that would be bad karma, and that would create vengeance, and that would come back to bite you. Those people would then seek revenge for your revenge, and so on. If not in this life, then in future life, you're just setting yourself up for this cycle of vengeance. But in some cases, it's your responsibility to inform others, to warn others, and that there is room for that. and you should be mindful of the need to warn other people. Not that you want to, you should not be obsessed about worrying about, should I warn other people? Oh, if I don't warn them, this will happen. But you have to acknowledge sometimes it's right to. And just do it and move on. And if that makes that person angry with you, that you told on them or so on, that's also none of your concern. Remember, it's just samsara. And sometimes you have a duty, and you shouldn't be stubborn about absolutely refusing to say or do anything that leads to consequences for others. But be very careful and, for the most part, wary of your own inclination to bring consequences to others, because it's that desire is very dangerous. The third thing is, I don't appreciate these memories coming back. This is important. It's important to understand memories are never the problem. Memories are also not which is causing you to get angry, and you should see them as just another experience that you're perceiving incorrectly. This is what we do. We perceive things based on delusion, based on ignorance, based on our wrong views and wrong perceptions. Memories are just memories. And that's easy to say, difficult to appreciate, difficult to live. But that's the goal. The goal is to be able to live that the memories are not the problem. There's no problem with remembering even the most terrible things. The problem is that I don't seem to be able to experience these without being triggered. The problem is on me, on how I respond. And so you apply mindfulness to change that behavior, to learn to just see the memories as memories and leave it at that. It just takes practice. You practice mindfulness, eventually that change comes about.
The next question is, sometimes I feel very encouraged that through hard work by practicing vipassana ardently, I will be able to attain sotapanna in this life. I feel encouraged because I don't know what happened in my previous lives. But sometimes I feel like I'll never be able to get rid of craving or the seed of rebirth when listening to a story such as that of the Brahma who became a pig. How can I overcome this feeling, and how should I aim my daily practice?
Also feel like you'll never be able to get rid of craving. That's how we say that. But you think that. This is a problem with the way we use language, because your statement is a very common statement. I feel this. The truth is, you don't feel that. You think that. But accompanying that thought is a feeling, or more accurately, is an emotion. You like it, you approve of it, or you disapprove. So in this case, you approve of this thought. That's important because you don't have to overcome the thought. You have to see the thought as just a thought, having no bearing necessarily in reality. You can think to yourself, I will never be able to get rid of craving. But that's just a thought. That doesn't, it isn't true just because you thought it. But you have to notice your acceptance of the thought, that you let the thought get to you, let it trigger something in you. So usually fear or worry. You think to yourself, I'll never be able to get rid of craving or the seed of rebirth. You think about this story and then you think, I'll never be, and then you worry. Or you worry and worry leads to the thought. Either way, but the worry is separate, the fear is separate. What you actually feel is fear or worry or something like that. And that's important, because otherwise you can't identify what's actually happening. and you can't apply mindfulness. So when you see that it's actually a thought, then you can say thinking, thinking. When you see it's fear, you can note the fear independently, afraid, afraid, or worried, worried. Yeah, be able to separate those, because that thought is not useful. It's not true, obviously, but it's thought that springs from fear, springs from worry, and then cultivates more fear and more worry. Separate them out and note the fear, note the worry, note the thought. Also note the encouragement. This is what I was talking about, inspiration. Encouragement is another word for that. You feel encouraged and you think, okay, this encouragement is good, so I can practice. And as a result, you like the encouraged feeling. You like what you call encouragement, which is actually often just a happy feeling. You feel good, you feel happy, and there's liking there. And so you cling to that. And when it's not there, you can't possibly practice because you don't have this fuel, which makes it a crutch. It's not the best way to support your practice. It's not the best source of support for your practice. You should not depend on encouragement. When you feel discouraged, you should be mindful of the discouragement. When you feel encouraged, you should be inspired. You should be mindful of the encouragement and the liking of it, disliking of the discouragement.
Bante, the next question is, when I was first introduced to Buddhist meditation, I read a phrase that mentioned how humans see reality as concepts. Then I had this profound realization. What is this cutting of wrong view? Was this the cutting of wrong view?
So, yes, probably sounds like, I mean, quite possibly. It's hard. You don't mention what is this profound realization. But it certainly could be a kind of cutting of wrong view. But we usually use the word cutting to refer to the attainment of nibbana and the consequences of attaining nibbana. So it's certainly possible that that happened to you. It's just highly unlikely. Not the sort of thing that just randomly happens. It's much more common for there to be, people will describe what they call these profound realizations, and they'll talk about how it lasted for days or weeks or months, and eventually faded away. But usually it's just the happiness and the peace that comes from letting go of your wrong views. And so it is a kind of a cutting, but it's still just temporary. It's certainly possible that after weeks or months you go back to those wrong views. But it is such a relief when you first learn, study Buddhism, and are able to open your eyes to a new way of looking at things that's much more peaceful. But what I meant to say is these profound realizations they're great, but they're not that profound. I mean, they're not profound enough. They're not sufficient to actually cut wrong view. They cut it temporarily. I mean, potentially permanent, but not for sure. Because it always has the potential in this life or future lives to come back. But you can feel the relative profound peace that comes from it, and you appreciate that. But often you like it, and then you get attached to it. And That's not good. More, yes, people often equate this with the attainment of enlightenment. So people will believe they're enlightened when they're actually not. And there's ego involved there and delusion, of course. And that's problematic. I mean, it's not a big problem, but it can prevent them from doing what's actually necessary to cut wrong view when they believe they've already done the work. Called jnana. Jnana is one of the 10 upakilesa. Vipassana upakilesa means it takes away from the quality of one's clarity of mind because one clings to that jnana, the knowledge, and thinks it's, oh, this is enlightenment, this is the goal. And they cling to that. They often will cling to the insight, trying to hold on to this thing that brought such peace and exuberance and happiness. And that thus, as a result, it actually pollutes and corrupts your quality of mind, your clarity of mind.
Bante, the next question. Is it considered craving or attaching if you wish to experience many rebirths and if the goal is to end suffering, meaning enlightenment?
Experience many rebirths. I mean, if you wish anything that's attached, it's craving. Well, I don't know. Like the word wish, it's just a word, right? And you can make determinations that appear very much like wishes, but you can do it without craving. It is possible. So the important thing to understand is wish is just a word. What do you mean by wish? If you wish to experience many rebirths, it most likely is craving. But technically, I don't think it has to be. It's just there could be some edge cases where someone, for example, has the view that I don't really want to be reborn, but I think it's the best way to become enlightened. That would probably be a wrong view. But it doesn't necessarily have to do with craving, right? I mean, there's most likely craving involved somewhere, but that view itself is just, it's just delusion quite often. You know, you make determinations not out of greed, but out of delusion. It's possible to make a wish not out of greed, but out of delusion is what I mean. Or out of wisdom. An arahant can make what you might call a wish. Buddha made what we might call wishes as the Buddha. But you wishing to be reborn, I don't know. It's either delusion or greed. Probably both. But if I don't understand the second part, goal is to end suffering. I mean, that somehow being reborn many times is going to end suffering. Maybe you're talking about for other beings. If I'm reborn again, I can help other beings become free from suffering. I mean, you consider the Bodhisattva still had craving. That's why he was reborn again and again and again. And part of that craving is the desire to become a Buddha. And when he actually became a Buddha, he wasn't even interested in teaching anymore. Once he became a Buddha, the first thing he thought is, why would I teach this? Nobody's going to understand it, or people are going to be, what would be my reason for teaching? How could I possibly want to teach when I have no wanting? So even the desire to help others is still conducive to rebirth. As you can see, if you're talking about helping others, Because obviously being reborn myself doesn't end suffering, it just prolongs it. If I were to be able to choose and say, be reborn, not be reborn, in what way would being reborn in and of itself free me from suffering? So if you're talking about helping others, yes, you can certainly help others, but it's still craving. It absolutely is still craving. That's why you're reborn again, because you want to be reborn again.
We have hit the hour and we still have some questions, but would you still be open to answer one more, Bante? Okay. When meditating, does it matter what time of the day it is? Is there a better time? How is the very early morning?
For formal meditation, the only thing to consider is twice a day is better than once a day. And the rationale there, I mean, there's no doctrine or theory. The rationale is formal meditation is a support, right? It solidifies your practice in a way that ordinary mindfulness doesn't. So if you do it once every 24 hours, there's a lot of time in between. But if you do it twice a day, spaced out, then there's less time in between each formal session. And so the benefits are reasonably understood to be better. And that seems reasonable. But yeah, there's absolutely nothing about time of day. That's completely a convention. You could argue something around, you could potentially come up with an idea that based on my sleep cycle or based on the light. I mean, there's certainly practical implications, like practicing in light versus dark. Practicing in the early morning as a monk, if you're living in the forest, might be difficult because there's lots of reasons. I mean, there's mosquitoes at twilight that you want to avoid, that sort of thing. That has nothing to do directly with the time. But why even those observations and conclusions are mostly unreasonable. Like, for example, suppose you said, when I first wake up, I'm very, I don't know, dizzy, tired. So I shouldn't practice then. Before I go to sleep, I'm very tired, worn out, so I shouldn't practice then. That's fine. It's okay to believe that, to have those ideas and do what you like. As long as you're practicing sometime, don't make excuses for all the time. But be aware that we are not seeking out the perfect or even the better conditions for meditation, not with the practice of mindfulness, because we're trying to learn about ourselves. And that's everything about ourselves. And we don't need to learn everything, but it means whatever. And a part of that whatever is learning the uncertainty that sometimes we're like this, sometimes we're like that. So it's in fact to your benefit to practice, I mean, potentially at different times would be preferable so that the conditions are different, right? Some people will say, in the morning, my practice is good. In the evening, my practice is bad. So I prefer to practice in the morning. It's a bad idea. If your practice is not good in the evening, that's very interesting. That makes it a good candidate for learning, for study. If your practice is good, it's also a good candidate. But it's good to have both so that you can experience this uncertainty or change, that things are not always the same. They're not always the way we want them to be. They're not always good. They're not always bad. Be able to see uncertainty and impermanence. An important part of the practice, and to not be attached that things should be this way, must be this way, and so on.
Thank you, Bante. That concludes the session for today. And just to mention, we had help from Sundown, the question preparing team, Sibitsu. And yes, thank you everyone for reading as well.
Thank you all. Thank you to people involved with making this broadcast possible, Dalaur, Subitsu, Sanda, everyone else. All the people who read, join the reading group. Join the reading group, you have to have done at least an at-home course in our tradition. It's because we want to present a united voice and to have, I mean, this is a Dhamma group of people with like interests. It's not a debate group. It's not an open forum. Those exist and can be good. It's not to look down on those, but that's not what this is. This is us working together as a team, as a group, for a common goal with common inclinations. If you think, oh, this is just an echo chamber, everyone's just telling each other what they want to hear, then you misunderstand the point. We're a team, we have the same goal, we're all headed in the same direction, and we have the same philosophy as a team, the same practice, the same regimen. We're like a team, a sports team. We all train the same way under the same coaches. This is what we do. So I appreciate that we have people coming every week, because if you all disappeared, this just wouldn't happen. Consider this to be your gift to all of us, gift to the broader community. It's a gift to people who sometimes just stop in or see the video on YouTube. My mother was here. I didn't mention it, but she was here at the beginning, just because she likes to see me, I think, or hear my voice or whatever. Now both my father and mother have stopped in, so that kind of thing is great, that we just have people stopping in. And you all make this possible by taking part. Much appreciation to everyone there. Much appreciation to the people who ask questions, to the people who just come out to listen. This is a great thing that we do to promote the Buddha's teaching and to uphold Buddhist tradition and Buddhist practice. Even just being here, we're supporting the continued existence of the greatest teaching there ever was, teaching of the fully enlightened Buddha. It's profound and difficult to understand, let alone appreciate teaching. So, doing something that's quite difficult to do, with an opportunity that's quite difficult to find, or taking advantage and making the best use of that opportunity. Much appreciation. May it be the benefit of all. Much appreciation to everyone who was involved in today's annual gift giving. So we've determined now that we have 3 monks living together here whose birthdays are all in May, and that the Buddha's birthday is, I think, always in May. I don't know if it ever is not in May. Anyway, around this time is also the Buddha's birthday, and so we've got lots of reasons to have this yearly celebration, yearly offering. But we had it on my birthday, and we discussed about what day to have it on, and we said we didn't really need to have it. There's no reason doing this day or that day. But I've got quite a following of people, and a lot of people are encouraged by the idea of having a celebration there. So there's a reason to have it on my birthday in particular. It's not a great reason, but it's a little bit of a reason. And the second reason is because associating it with your birthday means that it encourages a tradition. So other people hear about this and they're encouraged to take their birthday as a reminder that they've just lost another year of their life. They didn't gain a year. We don't add a year. You don't add a year on. You lost a year. That year's not coming back. And it's a reminder that if we don't start this next year off right, or if we don't do something good in relation to this year, we've just wasted the year. That year is lost and of no benefit to us. So we take each year, and hopefully it's not just once a year, but especially this year, we cap the year with a good deed. And so that's what so I get to do that on my birthday. We chose my day, and I appreciate that in the end that was the decision. But it also is not just my day, it's also Anoma Hamdro's birthday and Siri Chanda's birthday this month. And so it's for them as well. So the date doesn't change that. It's also a celebration of the Buddha's birthday as far as we're concerned. So this is part of our celebration this month of the Buddha's month of the Buddha's birthday. But it was a great day. We had the whole village come out. They came out days before to set up. They've been here coming out since the 5th of May to help out, to clean up the monastery, to set up the tables and the location. And this morning they were here from like 4 or 5 a.m. cooking rice and curries and cutting up fruit and everything. And they prepared coconut water for the monks before lunch. So when the monks arrived, they came to sit down in this waiting area, and we offered them emili, which is coconut water, as a drink, as a refreshment. And so there was so much support. And then when the time came, the people offered the food to the monks and offered the gifts. And it was like there were so many gifts that it was like a revolving door. People had to go in a circle. All the people would give gifts to the monks, and then they had to turn around and come to the back of the line to give the next set of gifts. 25 monks and about 10 things to give. Maybe not 10, but somewhere close to 10 things to give to each monk. So it was a great day. Much appreciation for all of Sri Mangalo community who was involved in that. Obviously, I can't appreciate the giving of money. Money is something I have to distance myself from, but I can easily acknowledge that none of this would have been possible without the involvement of the organization, and that the gifts given were actually made possible or supported by all of the support that we got for this specific occasion. So it's an excuse. You think, well, they're doing this big thing and I'll just take part in that. And you've done a great thing. I appreciate and rejoice in the kindness and goodness and generosity. So many people to take part in what was a great thing. The monks we had a lot of happy monks and appreciative monks and rejoicing monks. The monks were happy to see, especially foreigners, I think, because they see Sri Lankan people doing it. But it's a source of great appreciation for me and as well, but certainly for all the people who grew up Buddhist, to see foreigners and to hear about foreigners. They think our organization is quite special, and it is quite special. I feel it's quite special to see people who didn't grow up Buddhist, maybe didn't even grow up thinking about generosity at all, suddenly be inclined and dedicated to such good deeds, really bring about that change organically late in life often, to wrestle with this in a way that cultural Buddhists often don't have to wrestle with this, who are just taught from an early age to be kind and generous and especially support Buddhist monks and monasteries and so on. So to have this idea to think, hey, let's do this to support Buddhism. It's often something very new for people. So much appreciation and rejoicing for the good deeds of everyone who was involved in this. And if you weren't involved with it, if you didn't hear about it or didn't have a chance to get involved with this project, that don't be discouraged by that. Just the appreciation, hearing about it and thinking, wow, that sounds like a really good thing. Even that is a good deed. I rejoice in everyone rejoicing in this. If you appreciate what we did, you hear about this and think, wow, that's a great thing. There, I appreciate that you appreciate it, because that's a great deed. So all of these good deeds, all of the good deeds, especially on today, which is the best thing about today, is that we were all able to come together and have this Dhamma group and study the Buddha's teaching. The second best thing is all the gifts that we were able to give and all the generosity we were able to perform as a spiritual practice. And the support we were able to give to monks, often giving them gifts for their monastery that they requested. We gave a big fan. Someone wanted a ceiling fan and different things that they could use in the monastery. So good things happened on this day with this Dhamma group, with the giving, with our own mindfulness and practice that we've done on this occasion and throughout the day. May all the goodness and the power of all of this goodness and our appreciation of this goodness, which is more goodness, along with all good deeds from the past that you've all performed in this life and in past lives, along with the power and the greatness of the Buddha, the greatness of the Dhamma, the greatness of the Sangha. May all of this power, may this greatness and this strength support and protect all of you to find happiness and prosperity in this life and the next. May you live long and healthy, happy lives with the strength to confront and face and overcome any difficulty that might come your way. When you pass from this life, may you go on to greater and greater happiness and clarity. May you be dedicated to the cultivation of clarity and purity of mind and the Buddha's teaching. Dedicated to the Dhamma, have the mind connected and always focused on Dhamma, truth, righteousness, goodness, reality. And through the practice of the Dhamma, may all of us, everyone here, find peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering, finding the path, fruition, and Nibbana. Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu.
Wishing you wellness and Bhante.
Have a good week, everyone. Sadhu.